Welcome to We Can Be. I'm Chris DeCardy. I am excited to welcome nationally renowned art curator and author Kilolo Luckett as our guest today. Kilolo is the founding executive director and chief curator of ALMA Lewis, an experimental art platform that centers on uplifting contemporary Black artists and culture. In addition to being a sought-after curator and exhibition book author, she brings a rich history of experience to her work, including positions as Director of Development at the Andy Warhol Museum, as a consulting curator at the August Wilson African American Cultural Center, and as a consultant for creativity program grant recipients for the Pittsburgh Foundation and our Heinz Endowments. Kilolo is writing an authorized biography of Naomi Sims, the country's first Black supermodel, and is a valued and effective advocate for bringing more diverse artists into our history books, museums, and communities. She is a wonderfully positive force, and we are thrilled to talk with her today. Kilolo Luckett, welcome to We Can Be. I want to begin with, what does being a curator mean to you, and why is it important?
I like to think of a curator as a person who's very curious, somebody who's research-based, who loves to read, who loves to do a deeper dive on a particular topic, person, place, point in time, and also to be a facilitator between the artist and the art and the audience.
I read somewhere that when you were a kid in a fairly large family in Mississippi, if I have this right, there's a story about a lemonade stand and friends and selling art, and you were more about brokering them and the art through to the lemonade stand than creating art.
Wow, somebody did their homework. So yes, I'm from Mississippi, and my parents moved up north for graduate school. Mm-hmm. So this whole lemonade story took place in Bowling Green, Ohio. And I was with some of my friends, and we had this lemonade stand. And something inside me just said I needed to go back home and get some of the pieces of paper that your friends make work on and bring them to the lemonade stand, because back then a lemonade was 25 cents. And I thought, well, if I sell the work for 50 cents, most likely somebody's going to give us $1 and say, keep the change. I literally just thought that customers needed art in their lives with their lemonade. And who's going to refuse kids? And I always had my friends sign their artwork, too. To this day, ask my nieces, nephews, whenever they make art, I always say, make sure you sign your name and the year. But yeah, I don't know what possessed me to do that. But I just knew that people needed art in their lives with their lemonade.
I love it. That's awesome.
And it did work, actually.
It's like early cross-marketing at age 5. That's pretty sophisticated. But it's also so awesome that you had this notion of that you had things that you thought were important and that deserved to be seen. So how do you journey from Mississippi to Bowling Green to Pennsylvania and end up at Pitt? And how did you decide art history was of interest?
Yes. So I come from a small town. I come from farmland and living in Bowling Green, Ohio. My parents divorced and then moved to Harrisburg, where my father and my stepmother lived. And I babysat. And one of the couples, the family that I babysat for, one was an artist. Her name is Mary Claire Evans, and we're still friends. We know each other till this day. And she would take me to some of her art shows and show me how to hang the work and greet people. And so that was a way for me to talk to people and network and also have a better understanding and appreciation for art. I never went to museums growing up. It was more of history. I didn't really go to my first fine art museum until another family that I babysat, Karen Kelly, she's like my surrogate mother, took me to the Susquehanna Art Museum. And that's where it kind of clicked for me. Not that I knew what a curator was, but looking at art books as a young child in libraries and seeing some of those works that I saw translated onto a museum wall. And so I went to school. I was going like the medical track. I actually worked 3 years for a doctor, and it wasn't until probably third year in college that I was involved in a car accident, and I took some time off of school, and it was like my second art history class, and I fell in love with it. And then I took a photography class at the Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media. Richard Hurst was my first photography teacher. And I loved taking pictures of people, street photography, being in the darkroom, watching something come to life.
That does turn you into a creator, into an artist. Teenie Harris is a photographer from here. When you said street photography, is that like, did you know who he was? Had you been exposed at all at that point?
I hadn't actually. And it's funny, my instructor, Richard Hurst, said to me, wow, your images are really interesting. And these were random folks that I did not know. And he said to me, oh, look up Diane Arbus and Lisette Modell. And I was like, oh, okay, as if these people lived in Pittsburgh, knew nothing about them, went to the library, learned that they were both deceased, and saw their images. And I was like, oh, wow, there is a similarity, there's a likeness. And that sent me on the research of learning more about Diane Arbus and her contributions to photography and really making photography this bona fide art form, this fine art. And Lisette Modell, seeing the way in which she operated. So all of these different photographers, but, I couldn't draw. I can compose an image, but I cannot draw to save my life, and that is okay.
I am the son of an artist and an art teacher who also cannot draw, so I hear you. I see you on that. So you go through Pitt. Had you ever been abroad before you had the chance to go to Guadalajara, Mexico? Was that your first time abroad? Oh, so tell me a story about that, but tell me how you got to Guadalajara and about service and what that was, and does that play in on your journey? How?
Service is a big part of the work I do. Through this Catholic organization called Opus Dei, they would do these quote-unquote missionary trips. But for me, I wasn't really interested in the missionary side. I was more interested in interacting with the families and the kids that I was going to be teaching English. And then in the afternoon, we would go to the kids' homes. And so that was really transformative for me because I was in my early 20s and all the other girls, I think there was 11 of us total, were all fair-skinned, blonde, blue-eyed. I was the only African-American. When we went to the school the first day, these Mexican kids had never seen anybody lighter than them because they were like brown-skinned kids, and they'd never seen anybody darker than them. So I was this walking like body of knowledge for them, and it was a blast for me because it was probably one of the best times of my life working with these young kids and teaching them how to double dutch. Because we were like, okay, we're going to jump rope. And they're like, oh, okay. I'm like, no, we're going to double dutch. And so even the other women that were with me, they'd never double dutch. So it was like a cultural thing. So things that I thought I was going to go there to do, I did much more. And I learned so much about the people. And some of the kids I'm still in contact with, they're now like in their 30s. And some of the families that we got to stay with, I'm still in contact with some of them too.
If you fast forward in your life, you've had these other moments where you've been pretty public about the exhaustion of being the only African-American woman in a particular place. I just wonder how you think about that. Like at what moment, what makes some moments joyous around that difference? And what moments feel exhausting for you in that mix? What does that bring up if you think about those two stories put together?
There's just a natural feeling for me, whether I feel welcomed in a space or not. It's body language, it's energy. So with these young kids, they just welcomed me and they were so excited to see me. They were really in awe, of course. They were touching my skin and I had braids at the time. But there was a level of respect and regard that they had for me. And so it was reciprocal.
Humanity, at a basic human level.
Yes, absolutely. Right. So they didn't fetishize me. I mean, they even asked me, this was all in Spanish, did God leave you in the oven longer than they did for me? And it was funny. It is funny because these are 5, 6-year-olds.
Right.
And I was like, well, actually, no, it doesn't work that way. But, okay, philosophically, yes. So, but there wasn't the vertical. There wasn't the hierarchy of established, oh, you're darker, therefore you're at the bottom. It was nothing like that.
Right.
So being on the art commission when I was there for like 12 years, I kept saying, hey, I shouldn't be the only African American. I want other people. Being the only one, for me, is not this badge of honor. There
Right.
should be a wide variety of people at the table with different perspectives that will serve as a generative dialogue, conversation. We should be celebrating the wide variety of humanity that exists.
I appreciate that distinction. You talked about going out and taking pictures. I mentioned Teenie Harris, who's an African-American photographer. You went back to white photographers that were an inspiration in this. So that history of art and the history of Western European art that you studied and learned a lot about. How does that journey move for you professionally then? And what were you deciding to do professionally over these years that become the antecedent to Alma Lewis, which we'll get to in a second?
I tended to have the second education. I don't know if you've ever heard that. With Black people, we were taught in school, but then we'd go home and we'd tell them or look at the textbooks. But then my dad or my mother would say, well, especially like with civil rights and slavery, Abe Lincoln freed the slaves. And then my parents would say, well, actually it didn't work. It wasn't that easy, simple, right? There are other books that we had in our home that would not see the light of day in school. That always carried with me. So going to school, changing my major, art history, knowing that the Western canon was front and center, but also trying to, at the same time, looking for myself within the Western canon, and then having mentors that helped support me, like Dr. Augustus Brown Jr., telling me, you know what, Kilolo, there are multiple canons. And I was like, wow, that's an aha moment for me. There's multiple canons. And of course there's multiple canons. He's like, there's the Asian canon. I mean, there's just so many things. I'm like, oh my gosh, so where are all these other canons? Some of it might be at the Frick Fine Arts Library, where I spent a lot of my time, but I'd be hard-pressed to find anything on South America or African art or the Caribbean. And so I had to go to other places. And that led me to people's homes, people that traveled the world, people that were visiting lecturers, who had other books that weren't in the libraries, like the Carnegie Library or the Hillman Library. I was always looking beyond what was in front of me, what was being taught to me. And that would get me in trouble a lot because my teachers would be like, oh, why can't you just follow the curriculum, Kilolo? I'm like, but there's all this other stuff. I see this Black subject in a painting and we're talking about everything else except for that Black subject. That kind of stuff, I would say, my mother was like, that would get you into good trouble. I wouldn't get in trouble at home. My mother was like, well, that's what you need to do, is you need to challenge the teacher respectfully. I take that into everything I do. And so being afforded the opportunity to work in these various different museums and different cultural spaces in Pittsburgh, I kept questioning, why did I not see Black curators? Why did I not see Black educators? Why did I not see Black directors? And I would travel the country in other places, and I would see Black and brown people in other spaces. And I'd come back to Pittsburgh and I'd say to my colleagues, what's going on? Pittsburgh's missing out. And so I would just push and push, and so I get pushed out. And so I realized, okay, well, I have to build my own institution. If we are truly going to be this cosmopolitan city and that we're innovating in technology, we're innovating in the medical industry, we need to be innovating in the visual arts. We have this big philanthropic community and that we have this world-class series of museums. Why can't we bring world-class Black and brown curators and directors as well?
That's the push. That's what becomes Alma Lewis then. Why this institution in this space?
I knew I wanted to start my own thing. I started off doing pop-ups, and foundations like Kilolo, these sound like really interesting ideas, but we need the data to back up the work that you want to do. And that's just the way foundations are set up. I get it. Well, I'm not going to wait to do the data because I already know that there's the absence of. I know that there's an opportunity to step in to that absence and make something that is generative. Where are the Black curators? Where are the Black arts writers? Yes, we have Black visual artists in Pittsburgh, but I'm not seeing them in these museums. I'm going to bring those people to Pittsburgh. So I turned to my friends to fundraise, and I used my own money and raised $20,000. I went to a foundation. It was actually the Heinz Endowments. And I said, hey, I raised $20,000. Can you match this? Because I'm going to be bringing in such and such curators, such and such arts writers. I'm going to do this symposium over the course of a weekend. And I'm going to bring them here. We're going to go to the Carnegie Museum of Art, the Warhol, the Mattress Factory, that kind of thing. We're going to look at the collection, and we're going to connect with the curators and the directors there. And that was the first start of By Any Means. I also did a dinner at my friend who's the director of Concept Art Gallery, my good friend Allison over there. I had my friend who was a chef. He provided the food, and we had this wonderful dinner with a wide section of people from Pittsburgh.
That's awesome.
And that was so illuminating. And I remember Janet Sarbaugh came.
Janet Sarbaugh, who used to be the director of the arts program at the Heinz Endowments.
Yes, yes. And she came, and you all saw that there was some real merit behind it. And so that was like the impetus for Alma Lewis. Alma Thomas and Norman Lewis, they are known as the grandparents of Black abstraction in the United States. Norman Lewis was the first Black person to win the Carnegie International Prize in 1955. Alma Thomas, coming from the South, moving to Washington, D.C., and in 1972, the year I was born, was a good year, she becoming the first African-American woman to have a solo show at the Whitney Museum. Alma Lewis is a contemporary experimental platform that centers Black arts and culture, and creating a home where Black art, Black culture can really thrive and bring artists, world-class artists, early career artists that are working in a very rigorous way, and to support them in their work, whether it's a residency, exhibition, and then also building this Black archive.
What do you want for somebody who comes into Alma Lewis? What do you want that experience for them to be?
Well, the moment you step foot in Alma Lewis, there's a lounge, there's a sofa, there are these chairs, there's pillows. So you're automatically feeling like you're at home. You're walking into somebody's living room. And that's something I've always wanted to experience, because going into museums still to this day can make you feel like you're out of place. Even if you know I'm a curator, I'm an art historian, I know this art on the walls, but you still feel a certain kind of way, like you got to kind of button up and you got to be rigid.
Intimidated.
Yes, absolutely. There's this rigidity that I feel like when I go into certain museums, most museums actually. And so I'm like, that's not what I want. I want you to walk in and you feel a sense of familiarity. Every show I've done, books are integral to help the audience gain a greater insight into the show. And that's another way to connect. I've done that from the beginning of my curatorial practice. And people used to think that was the worst thing to do. But visitors loved it. That was another way for them to engage in the space. And I would have chairs where you could sit down. And that's something that I saw a long time ago, like in these historical societies. Things like the basement of the church, these little podunk places. For me, I was like, these are so cool. And so how do I bring that into more of a formal setting? Lowering the barrier of entry for people to make it truly more accessible.
You talked about different canons, and in an oversimplified way, there's a canon that you're like, there are people here practicing this not seen, can be brought together and have a place to see themselves, each other, and to build and to grow and to be in community. At the same time, one of the things that's super important is being able to reference and draw in or across other canons and other folks. It feels to me sometimes in society that we believe somehow there is an either or. There's a juxtaposition that if you're going to be with your community, it has to be often isolated and apart from everybody else. Or if you're going to be in relationship, you have to give up what is important to you from your community. How do you navigate that, or how do you think about that in Alma Lewis?
Silos do not exist in my world. And I know when I worked inside museums, there were these distinct silos that you could not cross. I felt like that did a disservice to the museum as a whole because you're missing out in conversations, regardless of whether you're a Black person, whether you're a person who doesn't know anything about art, that there's something for you at Alma Lewis. That's how I lead, because I want Alma Lewis to be a place where all people can interact and be challenged as well. It's not that I'm going to try to be all things to all people, because I can't, and I'm not going to, and it never works that way. I want to be the and then ... With the various different programs that we have, the artists that are coming in for the 3-month residency, they're experimenting, they're reimagining possibilities. And that's how I want that to translate into the people that are coming into Alma Lewis as well, that we can dream whole other worlds of possibility.
So you're not offering an answer, but you're offering the opportunity for question. It sounds like that is deeply important to you. How does this resident program fit in? Why? I mean, you could design that space and a holding environment in many ways. What is it about having residents that feels important about that magic you're trying to create?
I took a lot of time in developing the programming. I interviewed a whole wide variety of artists and asked them what kind of residency would resonate most with you. A lot of artists, when they take on residencies, they take on debt because there are things that aren't provided for them. And they might have to move across the country for a month, and they don't have housing, but they have an art space. They have to get there somehow, their transportation. If they don't have a car, they have to fly, or whatever that looks like. And so I was very intentional with making my residency be a residency where the artist is unencumbered, truly unencumbered, and that you are going to be taken care of because you are worthy of that. And it's going to be at a place, a time in your artistic career that you're going to need this 3 months to fully immerse yourself in exploring and dreaming and experimenting. And so at Alma Lewis, we provide the housing component, fully furnished apartment, a studio space, a stipend, because you get taxed on that money, and then also an opportunity to plug into what's going on in the community. We provide up to 3 classes at the various different art institutions like the Pittsburgh Glass Center, the Pittsburgh Center for Arts and Media. And the artists always take us up on that because they want to push their practice further and deeper. That's where the artists can truly take hold and create without having any of these external impositions. What does Alma Lewis mean to you?
So to me, the residency was formally, this is an amazing program. Are you giving an artist an opportunity to create, giving them a really healthy stipend, and then connecting them with resources in the community? That's amazing.
I enjoy how it feels like all of the resources that have been like curated around my residency feel much like how I like my workflow in the studio. The resources that you've curated around me and around specifically for my residency and my time here all feel like they're within reach.
I'm really invested in the person. I'm invested in you, Marvin, being free. And so a work can't exist without you having that capacity, that feeling, that sense of being free.
I'm really grateful for this time because I felt like I was able to actually make work that I wanted to make, but also be present in the work as well. And it wasn't like pressure filled. In the moment, when you're in it, you don't really see it. When you take a step back, it's just kind of like, I did this in 3 months. Having you guys here has been such a blessing because it helps with the process, you know? Sorry, I'm like getting emotional.
So I'm going to ask you a question that is like the most unfair question in the world.
Uh-oh.
Tell a story about one of those experiences with one of those artists or one of those moments you brought together that for you, like, you know, hits you in your heart and says, this is what I was trying to make happen here.
I'm thinking of an artist, and I'm not picking favorites, okay? Tunde Way. He's from Lagos, Nigeria. He's like my brother. He's a chef, and he never saw himself as an artist. And I said, you know, Tunde, you are an artist. And you're also a great writer, and you're a great storyteller, and you're a conceptual artist. I invited him to Alma Lewis, and it was hard for him when he first came because he was trying to figure out, like, what am I going to do? And we'd already talked about some of the ideas that he was wanting to focus on. But when he came and he saw this empty studio, and he was like, wow, I've never had a studio like this. And so it was hard for him to first make that transition. He literally got physically sick. He had to unlearn the ways in which he felt like he was trained, like he had to be a certain kind of way. I mean, he actually ended up going to the hospital while he was here. And it was hard to watch him go through that, but we were here to support him. And so that created a space for him to come onto the other side. I learned so much from that 3 months of Tunde being here. He did these 3 performances where he wore this Tyvek suit and pinned these dollar bills and balloons as this metaphor for gold and glitz and everything like that. And he had a basket of agege, which is bread, that he was walking around. He walked in on Frankstown and Homewood Avenue in Homewood. He was in Bakery Square because he knew the history of Bakery Square. And then he was in Oakland in Shenley Plaza, literally walking around, and people thought it was a spectacle. But there were so many different people that came up to him. He was in conversation about critiquing global capitalism. And what does that look like from this person who is not an American citizen, but has been living in America as this foreigner, and how colonialism, imperialism has impacted Nigeria, West Africa. Artists are the people that truly ask the hard questions and get us thinking in a very generative way of how we can truly be in a place that, I get all choked up when I'm thinking about this, but a place where no one is disposable.
My name is Cleaver Cruz, and my pronouns are they and them. I'm originally from the Bronx, New York City. Technically, I'm the inaugural literary artist in residence at Alma Lewis, so writing or playing with words is my thing. My intention coming into the residency was to mainly work on the research and the drafting of this novel that I want to do, and that my thought was, because it's a studio art space, is let's add collaging, but it'll be like a cursory thing of when I'm not writing, that could be my thing if I'm feeling overwhelmed. And the surprise was that ended up being most of the time that I spent was working on collages. It's one thing to bring people into a room, it's another to take care of them once they're there. And Kilolo is really that type of person. It's just clear, she really cares about us as artists, as people, that we're more than just the things that we make or create. And for that, I'm really thankful to have that example. And to have the example of a Black-led space has been amazing.
Having spaces that come from art, which is deeply personal and deeply emotional from the beginning, is different than an academic exercise. The necessity for spaces in the arts to explore and to value and to bring together, if we as a society are going to move through this terrible period, we've always had division, we've always had racism, prejudice, history, all of that, but it feels more and more that we are in those silos where that is the space and the norm. That what you're doing is something that is deeply rebellious in some way. You talked about the importance of books. You are writing a book now. Why did you choose Naomi Sims? Where are you in that process? And what is that mountaintop for you when you get done?
Naomi Sims was a fashion model, an entrepreneur, an author. She was born in 1948 in Oxford, Mississippi, and moved to Pittsburgh. And she graduated from Westinghouse High School, which is in Homewood neighborhood. And in 1966, she moved to New York to go to school at NYU. And she essentially was seen on the street. A photographer took her pictures. Gustav Peterson, Gus we call him, he's no longer here. He's with the ancestors. He took the picture of her, and this fashion editor of the New York Times, Patricia Peterson, put her on the cover of what we know today as the New York Times fashion magazine, but back then was Fashions of the Times, because she was beautiful and that she was worthy. A black woman, all in black, in front of the Met in 1967. And that was a radical statement. So many things that I learned about Naomi Sims that I was just literally looking to write an essay about her and publish it. And then her ex-husband, Michael Finley, that I interviewed, encouraged me to look beyond like this long-form essay to a biography. And so I took him up on that. And so fast forward, I start Alma Lewis, so I had to put that on the back burner. And so I use Alma Lewis in my gallery space as this platform to kind of reinvigorate myself into writing, because I have this archive. I have all these objects on Naomi Sims. I want to put this show right now on view in Pittsburgh of Naomi Sims and her life, because she made a major impact on the fashion industry and making it possible for models like Tyra Banks and Cindy Crawford and Christy Turlington and Naomi Campbell to do what they do now, because she was this multi-hyphenated woman who did both editorial and runway, mind you, in the late 60s and into the early 70s, and then also wrote books. There was nobody doing that ever. And so she really was a groundbreaking person in that regard.
What an incredible opportunity. The parallels of breaking down silos and being committed to being yourself in different places and to be able to create a more positive future are running through all of that as well. Thank you for being here. We call this podcast We Can Be, which we hope invites listeners to envision being part of positive change for a more inclusive world. If you completed that sentence, what do you hope or believe that we can be?
We can be much more than who we are right now. We can definitely reimagine a better world where we all are worthy.
Kilolo Luckett, thank you for being with us today. It's been a joy and a pleasure to get to speak with you.
Thank you so much for having me, and this was a wonderful conversation.